So, let's start. Number 9. The Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden sounds like it should be just a metal band, but centuries before it was blasting in concert halls, it was supposedly blasting people's sanity in dungeons. Imagine a coffin, but instead of velvet cushions, it's lined with iron spikes. Victims would be shoved inside, the door slammed shut, and the spikes would pierce their body not fatally at first, but in all the wrong, painfully survivable places. You wouldn't die quickly, you'd just slowly bleed, suffocate, and panic in total darkness. The design wasn't about efficiency, an axe or rope could end things in seconds. This was about dragging out terror, making an example, and probably making the executioner feel like an overzealous interior decorator. But here's the twist. Historians debate if the Iron Maiden was even real in the Middle Ages. The earliest references don't appear until the 1700s, long after the Age of Dungeons. Some argue it was more of a museum invention, a way to sell the dark and scary medieval vibe to tourists. So maybe nobody was ever spiked to death in one, or maybe someone was and we just don't have the receipts. Real or not, the sheer fact that humans dreamed up a coffin of spikes and believed it was totally plausible says everything about our morbid creativity. Whether it was ever used or just a fear-fueled fantasy, the Iron Maiden still lives on as one of history's creepiest symbols of torture. Number 8. The Breaking Wheel. Meet the Breaking Wheel, also known as the Catherine Wheel. If the Iron Maiden was psychological horror, this one was pure physical agony. Victims were tied to a massive wooden wheel, arms and legs stretched out. Then the executioner smashed their bones one at a time with a heavy iron club, just enough to turn the body into something resembling a shattered marionette. After that, the broken body was woven through the wheel's spokes like grotesque human basket weaving. The wheel, now decorated with a dying criminal, was either hoisted on a pole or left on the ground for crows to peck at. Some victims lingered for hours, even days, before shock or dehydration finished the job. Occasionally, judges allowed a mercy blow to the head or chest to speed things up, but mercy was optional, and more often than not, the condemned got the full performance. Crowds gathered to watch, kids included, because nothing screamed community bonding in the Middle Ages like watching someone slowly disassembled in the town square. The breaking wheel was used well into the 1700s across Europe. It wasn't just about punishing a criminal, it was about terrifying everyone else into obedience. It was punishment as performance art, proving that sometimes history's sense of justice was as twisted as the bones on that wheel. Number 7, the Pear of Anguish. On the list of things you don't want anywhere near your body, the Pear of Anguish ranks high. At first glance, it looks harmless. Just a small pear-shaped piece of metal. But this wasn't for eating. The device had 4 petals that could be expanded outward by turning a screw, insert it into someone's mouth, crank it open, and suddenly the jaw is shattered. Insert it elsewhere, and the damage was far worse. The pear was supposedly used on blasphemers, liars, and people accused of witchcraft. It wasn't about killing quickly, it was about humiliation and pain. A victim's screams were muffled if the pear was in the mouth, and if used in other parts of the body, it could cause catastrophic internal injuries without immediate death. In other words, it was a torture device designed with way too much creativity. But here's where things get murky. Historians argue whether it was really used or if it's more of a later legend. The surviving examples of pears might have been symbolic or even elaborate hoaxes collected centuries after the so-called torture era. Still, even if no one actually endured it, the idea alone tells us plenty about medieval imaginations. Someone thought it up, built it, and sold it to a lord or inquisitor who probably nodded and said, "Yes, perfect, order 3. The fact that it even exists as a concept is enough to make your teeth ache. Whether it shredded flesh in real life or just in nightmares, the Pear of Anguish proves that people have always been disturbingly inventive when it comes to finding new ways to ruin someone's day. Number 6. The saw torture. Sometimes the simplest tools become the cruelest. The saw torture was exactly what it sounds like. Take a large saw, hang someone upside down by their ankles, and start cutting from the groin downward. Why upside down? Because gravity kept the blood rushing to the brain, ensuring the victim stayed alive and conscious far longer than they should have. Accounts claim victims were sawed slowly down the middle, sometimes all the way to the chest, before finally passing out. And the best part? This didn't require a fancy machine or elaborate setup, just a saw, some rope, and a complete lack of human decency. The method shows up in records from Europe and the Middle East, often used on people accused of treason, adultery, or witchcraft. Some sources suggest it was used as late as the 17th century. Public execution squares loved it because, again, torture wasn't just punishment. It was theater. Imagine being in the crowd, buying your bread and cheese when someone gets hoisted up and turned into an anatomy lesson. Whether every detail is exaggerated or not, the symbolism stuck. The saw wasn't just a tool of execution, it was a statement of total humiliation. You weren't just killed, you were dismantled like a piece of lumber. Number 5. The rat torture. If you hate rats now, imagine living in a time when they were weaponized. Rat torture was one of the cruelest yet simplest methods. The setup: place a cage of live rats on a victim's bare stomach or chest. Heat the other end of the cage with fire. With nowhere else to go, the rats did what rats do best: chew, claw, and burrow through flesh to escape. Descriptions of this practice appear in both medieval Europe and colonial South America. Some Inquisition records even hint at its use during interrogations. It wasn't a quick death either. They clawed and tore through muscle, sometimes burrowing deep enough to reach vital organs. The victim was alive for most of it, fully aware of their insides becoming a rodent escape route. And here's the twisted part: it didn't require any fancy technology. You didn't need a forge or iron spikes or complex engineering, just rats, a cage, and heat. The horror came from the fact that the torture wasn't doing the damage directly, they just created the conditions for nature to do the work. Rat torture is one of those methods that feels too grotesque to be true, but enough accounts exist that historians take it seriously. Whether it was common or not, just the possibility of it was enough to make people confess. After all, who wouldn't spill secrets at the thought of rats tunneling through their body? It's like medieval Saw minus the Hollywood special effects. Number 4. The Judas Cradle. If you thought medieval torture devices couldn't get any more undignified, let me introduce you to the Judas Cradle. At first glance, it looks like a pyramid-shaped stool. Pretty harmless, right? Wrong. Victims were hoisted up and slowly lowered naked onto the pointed tip, usually inserted in the most uncomfortable possible area. The torturers didn't just plop you down either. They'd adjust the ropes so the victim's own weight pressed them onto the spike. Sometimes they'd add weights to the ankles to make the descent more painful. The result: torn flesh, internal injuries, infections, and of course, complete humiliation. Unlike some flashy devices, the Judas Cradle wasn't about spectacle. It was about slow, degrading agony. It could kill someone in a few hours, or, if infection set in, drag the suffering out for days. Think of it as the medieval version of a really bad chair design, except instead of back pain, it came with a bonus side of excruciating death. What makes it worse is that it wasn't confined to one region. Variations of the Judas Cradle pop up in accounts across Europe, tied to witch trials, political dissent, and even petty crimes. The symbolism was clear. If you went against authority, they were going to break you physically and mentally in the most degrading way possible. And all because some sadist once looked at a pyramid-shaped stool and thought, yeah, this'll really spice up our interrogation process. Number 3. The iron chair. Medieval Europe had a real thing for chairs. If they weren't humiliating you with the Judas Cradle, they were roasting you alive in the iron chair. Picture a heavy iron seat covered with hundreds of spikes on the seat, back, armrests, and even the footrest. Victims were stripped, strapped in, and pressed down until the spikes pierced their skin. Not deep enough to kill immediately, but just enough to make every twitch agonizing. Sometimes torturers heated the chair from beneath, turning it into a slow cooking oven. Imagine sitting in a spiked barbecue grill while an audience watched. Because yes, this wasn't done in private. Execution squares often rolled these devices out for maximum dramatic effect. One particularly grim detail: blood from the victim would flow into a basin beneath the chair, making cleanup a little easier. That's how normalized this was. Someone invented a medieval drip tray for torture victims. The iron chair's design meant the victim could last hours, even days, depending on how tightly they were strapped in and whether the chair was heated. It wasn't about efficiency. It was about drawing out the fear, the screams, and the public message. This is what happens when you defy the system. And here's the kicker. Some versions of the iron chair remained in use well into the 19th century. That means people were still sitting down for the worst chair experience of their lives long after the Middle Ages ended. Number 2, the Heretic's fork. This one wasn't about crushing or burning. It was about making sure you never relaxed again. The Heretic's fork was a simple metal rod with 2 prongs on each end. One end was pressed into the underside of the chin, the other against the chest or collarbone, then strapped in place. The cruel trick? Victims couldn't move their heads without stabbing themselves. Looking down, and you'd get stabbed. You want to nod? Stab? Even falling asleep meant the prongs would jab into flesh. It turned rest, the one escape from pain, into another layer of torture. It wasn't designed to kill immediately, but the psychological torment was brutal. Victims were left in constant discomfort, unable to sleep or even lower their heads. Some forks even had inscriptions like "I recant" etched into them, forcing prisoners to literally brandish their guilt with every movement. The Heretic's fork was popular with inquisitors during witch trials and heresy hunts. It was cheap, easy to make, and terrifyingly effective at breaking people down. While other devices went for gore and spectacle, this one specialized in slow, quiet misery. Imagine being stuck in one of these for days, unable to rest, every tiny movement punished with sharp pain until your mind began to unravel. That was the true power of the Heretic's fork. It didn't just torment the body, it broke the will. Number 1, the rack. No list of ancient torture devices is complete without the rack, arguably the most infamous of them all. The concept was brutally simple. A long wooden frame with rollers at either end. Victims were tied by their wrists and ankles, and the rollers were slowly cranked, stretching the body inch by inch. At first, it caused extreme pain in the joints and muscles, but as the cranking continued, ligaments tore, shoulders and hips dislocated, and bones snapped. Victims were sometimes stretched so far their bodies were permanently disfigured or, in extreme cases, ripped apart entirely. The sound of joints popping and bones breaking became its own horror soundtrack. The rack was the ultimate interrogation tool in Europe for centuries. Kings, inquisitors, and judges all loved it because it produced confessions. Of course, those confessions were usually worthless after a few turns on the rack. Anyone would admit to being the Pope, a witch, or the inventor of pineapple pizza if it meant stopping the torture. But beyond its function, the rack carried immense psychological weight. Just the sight of it in a torture chamber could make prisoners talk before the cranking even began. Its reputation alone did half the work. What's particularly chilling is how long it stayed relevant. While other devices faded away, the rack lingered in use well into the Renaissance. It was still considered a valid tool of justice, while art, science, and philosophy were supposedly flourishing. Today, the rack remains the iconic symbol of torture, a device so feared that its name alone has become shorthand for unbearable pain. And honestly, it earned that legacy one stretched tendon at a time. Thank you for watching and sticking till the end. We've got plenty more videos coming in the future. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss them. See you in the next one.